I can't use this. It's introducing too much latency. Today I'm upgrading my arcade cabinet by adding the ROG Ally as the brains of the operation. There's a lot that I like about how this turned out, and one thing that I don't. One of my favorite things that I have here in the NerdNest is this arcade cabinet. It's the original Asteroids Deluxe arcade cabinet from 1980, and I got it super cheap because the internals were completely fried. So I gutted the whole thing and I put a RetroPie in there. I was really happy with it, but I think it's time for an upgrade for two reasons. Number one, I got to replace these controls on the left-hand side. You can see the blue ones are completely lit up and the red ones are completely dark. I'm not sure what happened, but they just stopped working eventually. So I'm going to open that up and replace all of the buttons, and I'll show you what that's like. The second thing is I'm going to replace the Raspberry Pi with my ROG Ally. I'm gonna try and have my ROG Ally over here outside of the arcade cabinet. We'll see how that goes. Previously I did this with the Steam Deck, and I had to dual boot into Batocera in order to get the controls to work, and I didn't like doing that. Plus I ended up having to put the Steam Deck inside the arcade cabinet, and so anytime that I wanted to use the Steam Deck, I had to open up the arcade cabinet, pull it out, swap out the SD card, and reboot. I figured running Windows is going to make this a little bit easier, so let's go ahead and get this started. What the heck is this thing? Oh, I meant to talk to you about this. This is you. You're fired? What do you mean I'm fired? Well, where do we start? Your work ethic is terrible, you eat all of my food, and let's be honest, you're kind of a jerk. Okay, true, but what is this? Oh, this is our sponsor, OBSBot. The OBSBot Tiny 2 is a fantastic 4K webcam. It's got a big sensor and fantastic autofocus, so you don't have to think about it. It has a 2-axis gimbal, which allows it to track you as you move around the room, but it also has voice controls, so you can tell it to do things like zoom in closer or zoom out farther. Now you'll notice it didn't actually do anything that time because I was mid-sentence, but if I stop, zoom in closer, zoom out farther, you can see that then it works. So it's unlikely to have accidental inputs. And it has one of the coolest privacy features that I've ever seen. If you say this command, which I'm not going to say right now, the device will go to sleep by pointing directly down, so you always know when the webcam is on. So if you want to pick up a Tiny 2 webcam for yourself, check out the link in the description down below, and a huge thank you to OBSBot for supporting this channel. Alright, back to the mods. Okay, the first thing that I want to do is replace the controls on the board because the red side is shorted out. Now it's been so long since I actually put this thing together, I don't remember how it's set up inside, so let's take a look. Here you can see that I've got all of the controls for the blue side over here, and they're all going into this controller, and all of the red controls are going into this one, and they're just 2 USB cords, so I'm just going to unplug those since they're getting replaced anyway. And let's go over to the bench. Okay, the next thing that we got to do is take this apart. So let's go ahead and unscrew these. As I unhook these, you're going to notice that right here this is labeled K1. So I followed that wire to over here, and I'm going to label this K1. That way I remember where everything was. And here is the board without any of the controls in it. Now I've got to put the new controls in. Now, it had been a really long time since I worked on the arcade cabinet, and I didn't realize that the buttons that I had purchased to replace the ones that had shorted out were completely different than the ones that I had originally purchased. It turns out they were way easier to install, and because they were easier to install, it was a much faster process this time around. Now, the old ones are a different model than my newer ones. You'll notice that this only has one connection. This has a whole bunch of connections. This is going to be a lot easier to set up, but they still sent me all these wires that I don't really know what they do. We'll worry about that later. All right, next up is, boy, I really hope that these are the same shape. Next up is to put in the joysticks. Are they going to fit? Yes, they are going to fit. The old ones are actually discontinued, so I was worried that the new ones would not fit in here. And there you have it. We've got that back together. Awesome. And then this is really cool. Each one of these is all wired together. So instead of having a bunch of separate wires all strung all over the place like I had with the last one, they're all together. It makes it so much easier to put things where they're supposed to be. Ah, these are for this. There, I just redid the buttons so that these are all facing the same direction. It should make it easier to attach all of these wires. And we're done with the red ones. Let's do the blue ones. Once I had everything put back together, I decided to hook it up to my TV instead of actually doing all of the work in the arcade cabinet, because I knew that there was likely to be some kind of issues that would arise during it and be so much easier to work on if I wasn't stuck in the arcade cabinet trying to put things back together. So, here's what I got to do. I've got my arcade board, and we've got to hook up these two USB ports to it. The blues are working. The controls are going the wrong way. So that means I installed these upside down. So I'm gonna have to fix that. Okay, I've got the joysticks turned around and hooked up, and they're all going the right direction. So let's go ahead and try this out. Let's get the camera to look at the TV. Unlock me. So what I'm doing now is I need to configure my input device so that it knows what buttons are doing what. All right, and it's saying I have two gamepads detected right now. One of those is the ROG Ally, the other one is this. So hold a button on the gamepad. All right, D-pad up, down, left, right. Okay. View is select, menu is start. Oh, weird. In addition to the joysticks, both sides also have 9 button inputs. And an issue that I was running into is that Windows could see all of the button inputs, but Steam, for some reason, wouldn't detect a start button and wouldn't detect one of the other button inputs. I had them both pinned out the same exact way, so I'm assuming this is a Steam issue and not something to do with the USB encoders that I was using. But what I ended up doing is just switching those pins to another set and doing it the same on both sides, and then everything was detected just fine. All right, the next test is when I hook the ROG Ally up to my arcade cabinet and turn it on, does it switch over to that screen? And here's that test. We'll come over here so we can see the screen. Arcade on. Yes! It worked. Now, all I gotta do is put everything back together, and that's actually not gonna take too long. It's all just USB at this point. So I'm gonna do that and we'll be right back. The next thing that I needed to do was map the inputs, and for this I used Street Fighter 2. The reason I used Street Fighter 2 is because all 3 punches and all 3 kicks have different animations. So when you push the buttons, you can easily see which attack are you sending, and then shut everything down, swap the pins around, turn it back on, and it worked. We'll go ahead and insert a bunch of coins. 2 players start so the computer doesn't beat me up. And Ken versus Ryu, classic.
Round 1, fight.
Okay, I can't use this. It's introducing too much latency. Now, at the beginning of the video, I did say that one of my goals was to have the ROG Ally outside the arcade cabinet with just a single USB-C wire coming from inside the arcade to the ROG Ally. Now that didn't actually work out the way that I wanted because the docking station I was planning on using was introducing too much latency. The reason I chose that dock was because it had a headphone jack so that I could only have one wire coming out of the arcade cabinet. But because of the added latency, I ended up switching over to an iVoler Steam Deck dock to use instead. And because that doesn't have a 3.5mm jack, I ended up putting the ROG Ally back inside the arcade cabinet after all. And let's just give it a quick test. Is working. Okay, let me screw this back in. Where's the drill? This project took me all damn day, but I am really happy with how it turned out. It's not exactly what I had in mind when I started it out, but overall I think it's pretty good. Now, one thing that I don't like about this setup is when I turn everything off in here at the end of the day, the ROG Ally continues to feed power to the controls on the arcade cabinet, and those lights don't turn off. So I have to remember to reach in the arcade cabinet and unplug the ROG Ally every night. I'm looking for a better solution, but until I get there, it's not that big of a deal. Now, on an episode of the NerdNest podcast, we were talking about using the ROG Ally for emulation, and on that episode I said specifically I wasn't going to be touching the ROG Ally for emulation until Emulation Station came to Windows. Well, I'm happy to tell you that they've got a working build and it's super easy to use. So let's move over to the computer and see how that works. Now, the folks over at Emudeck have gone through and done all of the hard work of setting up the emulators and getting the scripts all running. Currently, it's in early access for Windows. If you want to take advantage of this on Windows, you will have to join their Patreon. It comes in at $3.50 per month. Once you join, they will send you a link and a code in order to sign up and get all set. Once you've got it downloaded, you've got Emudeck right here on your desktop. Just go ahead and double click it. Now, you're going to be able to find 100 different tutorials about how to set up Emudeck on your ROG Ally. I'm going to recommend one from Retro Game Core. There is a link in the description down below. But one thing that I will point out to you, even though it's very, very obvious, is when you do go to set this up and you select your drive, I'm going to select my C drive, but you can select whatever drive you want. Then you're going to click on Next. Make sure that you pick ROG Ally because that customizes the script that is running in the background to make sure that you're getting everything working the way that you want. Once you have that done, you're going to go ahead and click Finish, which I'm not going to do because I've already gone through and set everything up. But there's a couple other things that you might want to do, like maybe you want to update your stuff every once in a while. So real quick, I'm going to show you how to do that. If I go into Manage Emulators, you can see that I've got these little orange icons on this telling me I need to update these different emulators. And I'm just going to go ahead and click on Update. It's going to go through and take care of it for me, so I don't have to do it myself. And now you can see that they are all updated, so I'm going to go back, and once I'm done, I can close it. Now, one thing that you do have to do is you have to run this through Steam. It's configured with Steam in mind. So I'm going to click on this. It's going to open up Armory Crate, and then under Content, I'm going to go to Game Platforms and Steam. Then once you've got Steam started, you go ahead and start Emulation Station just like you would anything else, and everything's going to be configured for you. Now, some of you might be wondering, why would I go through all of this trouble to set up an ROG Ally in the arcade cabinet when I could just run everything on my RetroPie? Well, there were definitely some games, some retro games that I can't play on the RetroPie, so that's one reason. But an even better reason is right here. Street Fighter 6 also runs on this thing. It would never run on a RetroPie, and so this game feels absolutely fantastic to play on these joysticks, and I'm so happy that I was able to get this to work. But what do you guys think? What else could I do with this setup? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed this video, you're probably going to enjoy this video too. From the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, everybody.